If I could politely interrupt your conversation, I'd like to go ahead and get started and be respectful of your time. Appreciate you coming down. I've got about 28 slides. It should take about 40 minutes to get through the presentation, and then we'll have time for questions and answers afterwards. So my name is Jim Barrett. I'm the general manager here at Coachella Valley Water District, and today's topic is proposed changes to the domestic or drinking water rates for our service area. There's a number of things that are kind of colliding based on actions that the state has taken that require us to respond. And those responses are reflected in the rate changes that are being proposed. First and foremost is the Chromium 6 drinking water standard. The state changed that 2 years ago. We have been involved in a number of different studies. We had a number of different meetings prior to the change. I realize there's a lot of different opinion about whether or not the change is necessary, but the fact of the matter is the state has changed the drinking water standard. We provide drinking water to our service area. We must be in compliance with the standard. That's going to cause us a significant amount of money to develop capital buildings, and then there will be a follow-on operations and maintenance cost. That is the driver. That project has to be complete by January 1st, 2020. So we don't have a lot of time to get going. We have done design and construction. We expect with the rates approved, we'll qualify for a state revolving fund loan, which will be amortized over 20 years, but the rate will be about 1.5% to 2%, which is much more favorable than what we could get out in the commercial market. In order to qualify for that loan, we must demonstrate to the state that we have an appropriate amount of debt service coverage available to us through the rates. That is the primary driver for what is happening this year. We've got also the historic drought. The governor last year, a little bit more than a year ago, provided an executive order which was implemented through the State Water Resources Control Board, which caused us to have to save 36% over what was saved in 2013. That was the state's requirement. We implemented it a little bit differently. We can talk about that if you want to. The state subsequently changed from 36 to 32, reflecting somewhat the different environmental conditions here, the weather, and the evapotranspiration, the water your plants need. We strongly suspect that the drought, while continuing, the state will have a meeting next week where we anticipate they will again change their regulations, and we will, of course, make recommendations to our board to respond accordingly. First, water budget adjustments. So we adopted water budget-based tiered rates in 2009 for residential and 2010 for commercial. We have not adjusted those rates since they went into place, since the analytical work in 2008 and 2009 was made. So if you've done any modifications to your landscape out there, you're basically getting the same amount of water now that you would have gotten then. We will be changing that methodology as part of this process to again incentivize conservation. And we'll talk a little bit more about those changes as we move forward. Another aspect, the state has passed, they were the last Western state in the country to pass a Groundwater Management Act. They did that last year as well. In other words, all of our drinking water comes out of the ground. We're not like Los Angeles or San Diego or San Francisco, where they drink treated surface water. Because it comes out of the ground and because of some of the problems that the drought has caused, specifically in the Central Valley, there's a great deal of concern within the state that our groundwater resources are not being adequately managed. So they passed this act, and what it essentially means is that by 2040, we've got plenty of time, but what we take out of the aquifer has to be balanced by what we put into the aquifer. The aquifer has to be balanced. Replenishment and supply for drinking purposes. We think we've done a pretty good job of that since 1918 when this agency was formed. We do appreciate the state's concern that maybe other areas aren't doing as well. but we do have to be responsive to that requirement. Additional conservation will help sustain the aquifer for the future and hopefully get us out of a position where the state feels they need to come in and take over management of the aquifer. And finally, the San Juan Capistrano court case. This is an area of law that's been redefined again and again since 1978 when Prop 13 came into play, which basically limited government agency ability to charge taxes and fees to service recipients, residents, citizens. That law was further refined in 1996 with Prop 218. There was a lawsuit, Bighorn Desert View Water Agency versus Virgil in 2003. They went to the California Supreme Court. They provided an opinion in 2006 which made water and wastewater rates subject to the 218 process. Until that time, not every water agency within the state used 218 to pursue rate changes. San Juan Capistrano further refined that area of law by looking at water budget-based tiered rates. What we're doing with this cost of service study and with our rate proposal is coming into concurrence with that new legal opinion. It's probably about the most time I'll spend on any single slide going forward, so I don't want you to be concerned that this is going to take most of your day. We'll look at three different parts in the presentation. The first will be the revenue requirements. So if nothing else, and I guess my laser, if nothing else, this purple line here is where we would need to raise rates if we didn't have conservation requirements moving forward, if we didn't have Chrome 6 moving forward, if we didn't have rate increases to what we charge ourselves for replenishment water that we put back into the aquifer when we take the drinking water out. It's an internal buy-sell relationship. What this would mean is that without any of those other issues, to be a reliable water utility, there are still things we need to do to guarantee when you go to your faucet in your kitchen or in your bathroom and turn on the faucet, there's water. 7%, not a 7% rate increase, but a 7% revenue increase. So what this slide shows is that because of all the other things I just talked about, the district needs to raise its revenue 44%. Doesn't mean that everybody's rate's going to go up 44%. Some people will go up more. We'll talk about that in a little bit as well. This just kind of shows you a spread of how our costs moving forward are going to be paid. If we just look again at the purple, that's where we'd be able to afford just on our rates alone. Our rates aren't sufficient right now to cover the cost of Chrome 6. There's not enough money right now for us. We have to go borrow money in order to make those improvements to comply with the law. State revolving fund loan. These blue bars are what it's going to take from the state to fund that project moving forward. Again, we have to have that in place by January 1st, 2020. We'll also have revenue bonds that we'll need to issue, again, just because we want to be a more reliable water agency. We maintain 2,000 miles of pipes. We've got over 100 wells. We've got 60 treated water, drinking water reservoirs that store water after it comes out of the ground. I won't spend a lot of time on that. But if we didn't have a rate increase, this would be the burn rate of our cash based on those requirements. We'd be out of money pretty much right at the end of 2016, maybe a couple months into 2013. We've got reserve policies. This is where our reserves would be right now. This line here will be the same on this slide and the next slide. What happens is the scale changes. So it's going to look a little bit differently, and I apologize for that. But what this slide shows is the benefit of having that state revolving fund so that we can afford the expenses moving forward. It allows us to keep our operating cash above our reserve line, our reserve policy. And then there's a couple other things going on there, but I'll try and be sensitive to the time. Cost of service. We did a cost of service study. We hired a consultant to come in, take a look at where our expenses were, where our revenues were. We're a public agency. We're kind of like a city in a lot of ways. We have our own governing board. We have our own ordinances and resolutions. We're not a public agency. We're not regulated by the Public Utilities Commission. Our customers are charged rates based on what it costs to serve them. That's part of the law. No customer can pay more than is required to provide that service. You can't have classes of customers subsidizing each other. Everybody pays their fair share. And again, we haven't raised rates since 2010. So shortly after we put the the drinking water budget-based tiered rates in place, we had one increase, and that's all. What have we done to avoid increases? We've deferred operations and maintenance. Anything that didn't need to be done wasn't done. We cut way back on capital projects, which is why, if nothing else was going on, we would need a little bump in revenue so that we could go out and do those things that had been deferred. We had an early retirement program back in 2009 in response to the recession that was taking place. Most of those people have not been hired back. Our employees now pay more of their retirement costs. They pay more of their medical benefits. At one point, the district was paying 100% of that. That's not true anymore. We've also limited pay increases. We have not, our rates, if you go back and remember, we haven't had a rate increase since 2010. We haven't even kept our rates current with inflation. So when you look at a cost of service, there are a number of steps involved. First, we identify the costs, what the pumping cost is, treatment cost, storage cost, all these things. We've got general overhead, admin, customer service, our billing, guys that go out and read the meters. Any water that we buy for replenishment is basically identified as a cost. Some of those costs then are allocated out. Some are joint costs, which are spread across all of our customers regardless of class. Some are specific to the type of service that you have. Not everybody lives in a house and just uses water for drinking, cooking, and washing. We look at the cost drivers. What's the maximum day demand that a particular customer has? For instance, with fire protection, you might have a fire sprinkler system in your building that you never use, but we have to size the service for that building, for that fire protection, to be able to provide a certain amount of water in a very short period of time. That places a greater demand on the system, so therefore that type of service is going to cost more than what you would need at your house. Irrigation systems, similarly, will place a greater demand for a greater amount of water over a shorter period of time than you would in your house. Those costs are then reflected through the infrastructure. We have to pull more water out of the ground faster, send it through the pipes faster, pump it faster so that your irrigation controllers can send it through the sprinklers and water your landscape. Finally, we assign the costs to the specific customer classes, and we've got examples here of what those classes are. Private fire protection. Some HOAs have their own private fire hydrants. There's a special rate for that. Outside our service area, there's a special rate for that. Construction, which is a temporary use, provides more administrative support, so there's a special rate for that. And then for landscape, commercial, multifamily, and single family that have meters in the ground on a recurring basis, they have special rates for those as well. Then we get into the rate design. So if we just look at where we are now, we compare pretty favorably with other rates within the region. If we look at where the rates are going to be, if the rate increase is approved on July 1st, again, we compare pretty favorably. And then we've got a graphic down here which just basically reflects these same rates. When we look at the rate, there's two parts to it. There's a fixed charge and a consumption charge. The fixed charge is what you pay because you have a meter that allows you to get water. Whether you use any water at all, you will pay that service charge. It's a monthly charge right now for residential folks at $7 a month. For different customer classes, it's still $7 a month. The current rate structure does not recognize a difference in current customer classes, so that's a pretty significant change that we'll have moving forward. And then the consumption charge, also called the commodity charge, the volumetric charge, is is a reflection of your budget. The more water you use over your budget, the higher rate you will pay. And we'll take a look at those here in a minute. So these are the consumption charges, the volumetric charges, the commodity charges. Sorry, this is the existing rate here. Tier 1, for our residential customers, that's the amount of water that's allowed for inside the house. It's basically 4 people per household, and it's about 50 gallons per day, which is the industry standard. When we put these in place back in, when we did the methodology in 2008, 2009, the sense was that we would allow 10 units inside. Over time, utility services have gotten more efficient. Your dishwasher is more efficient. Your toilets are more efficient. You've got aerators. Washing machines are more efficient. 8 units, we feel, is an appropriate reduction for inside use. When we first put the drought penalties in place, we had a number of requests from our customers saying, hey, I've got more than 4 people. I need a larger allowance. But to the best of my knowledge, I don't think anybody's come in and said they have less than 4 people, so go ahead and reduce my inside allowance. We don't measure inside and outside differently. It's just 1 meter, so what you don't use inside basically rolls over to outside. What we have here in the next tiers is your water budget is defined in Tier 2, and what you use over your water budget then requires a higher rate for the consumption over that budget. And we'll talk a little bit more about how that's developed in a minute. This is probably the largest change moving forward for our customer classes. Most residential units are 3/4 inch or an inch service. Right now, everybody with the 3/4 inch, regardless of the class of service you have, are paying $7 a month. For residential users, that'll go up to $11.30. For landscape accounts, that'll go up to $28. A lot of HOAs and cities have 1-inch irrigation meters. There's a significant increase that's going to take place on those irrigation meters. The primary driver for these increases is the cost of doing the chromium-6 remediation. Regardless of whether or not you use any water at all, every drop of water has to be treated. When you look at a cost of service study, it is appropriate to place those costs on the fixed side. One of the other changes that's probably not as significant is as the water district grew, we took over smaller water agencies, mutual water agencies in different parts of the valley. As we aggregated those systems, there were different costs associated with bringing them into the district. We're going to homogenize the costs across our entire service area. There'll be one rate regardless of where you live. There will be no more geographic rates. And that's because over time, the costs of maintaining and operating the system have become pretty equal. So at this point, I think I will turn it over to my able assistant to talk about the actual changes to the water budget. This is Katie Rourke. She is our supervisor for water management, and I believe she is very busy right now.
That's true. Good morning. My name is Katie Rourke, and I am the conservation manager for the district. I'm going to talk through water budgets and the changes that are coming under this proposed structure. So before I start on the presentation, bear with me if you already know this information. I'm sorry, I know a lot of you do, but I think it's important to talk about. The way that we bill on the water budget-based structure is related to each property individually. So I'm going to use single-family home as an example. In your single-family home, we give you a water budget that we feel is an appropriate amount of water use for that property, individualized every time. So your next-door neighbor might have a different budget than you. It's a question we get a lot, and I want to explain why. So first of all, as Jim mentioned, you get an indoor budget. So up until now, we've allowed an indoor budget of 10 units per household. That assumes 4 people in your household. Everybody starts out with 10. If, of course, you have more than 4 people, you come in, we can give you a larger indoor. The outdoor budget is calculated based on your landscape square footage and the amount of water that you would need to be able to irrigate that efficiently. So realistically, we're literally measuring your square footage of what we call landscapable area. I realize that landscapable isn't a word, but it's one we like. So we take the area that you could landscape. So we take out your house, take out your driveway, take out your sidewalks, and we assume that you have irrigated or you have planted that with wall-to-wall grass. So your entire property is grass. Then each day we use something called evapotranspiration, which is a rate that tells us how much water your plants would need that day. And we calculate how much water it would take to irrigate that many square feet of grass at a 60% efficiency. That all comes together at the end of the month, 30 days worth of use, plus your indoor budget, and that gives you a monthly water budget. That is why your budget changes every month. If it's a hotter month, you're going to see an increased budget. If it's a cooler month where your plants need less water, we'll give you a reduced budget to reflect that. So I'm going to talk through some of the changes and then talk through some of the ways that you can work towards meeting your budget. As Jim mentioned, water budgets were adopted in 2009 and haven't been changed since. And again, we assumed in 2009 that everyone had nothing but grass in their landscape. Before the drought, we had 75 to 80% of our customers meeting their budget. As I think has been gone over, the indoor budget reduction from 8 to 10 is really reflective of industry standards, where we know that things have gotten more efficient over time. I know that my dishwasher and my washing machine are more efficient than ones that were built a long time ago. And I'm more efficient in my own home in my use of water. So industry standards say that that individuals use between 50 and 55 gallons per person per day. So if we base it on 4, we come up with 8 CCF per person. 8 CCF per household. Again, the outdoor budgets are being changed, and this is a reflection of a movement that is closer towards our landscape ordinance. We put a landscape ordinance in place in 2008 and have since revised it to ensure that new development that comes in has to go through a plan check process. And in that process, we make sure that they're using landscape design that is appropriate for our climate. So they are not doing wall-to-wall grass. They're instead putting in some climate-appropriate planting. We're not moving all the way to the landscape ordinance because we know that lots of existing homes are unable to do that, but we're getting a little bit closer to those standards. Another big change is that we're going to be able to forecast budgets. This is a pretty significant change for us internally, and I think one that our customers are going to be pleased to see. As I mentioned now, we use the ET rate, the evapotranspiration rate, every single day to determine how much water your plants will need that day. Right now, we're using live data, so we don't know how much water your plants need until today. That being said, we can't tell you in advance how much water you could use each month. We've heard from our customers that that's difficult because it's difficult for them to try and stay within their budget if they don't know what it is. So we're moving to a system where we'll be using historical weather data instead. We have a 5-year rolling average of ET data every single day for the last 5 years. We'll be averaging that and creating a budget going forward that is based on historical use, not live data. There's a good pro to that, which is we'll be able to project your budget. We'll be able to tell you in advance how much water you'll get. But the con is if we have a strange weather event that normally would have given you additional budget, you won't have that anymore. So it's a little bit of a trade-off, but we did look at the historical average and we compared it over time, and the difference is not significant enough, I don't think, to merit not doing this. So hopefully that'll be a customer-friendly, helpful way to meet your budget. So again, the indoor budget's reduced down to 8. I want to talk a little bit about how these other factors are being incorporated. So if you look at the bottom, we're saying 50% grass and 50% desert-friendly landscaping, where previously we said 100% grass. What that really means is actually the second line there, the plant factor. Without getting too technical, the plant factor that we use to calculate water need for grass is 0.8 in the winter and 0.6 in the summer. So what we did is we took low water use plants plant factors and grass plant factors, and we average them together to get 0.65 in the winter and 0.55 in the summer. So this is one of the integers that goes into the equation. Sorry, I'm going into algebra, but one of these equations that helps us calculate your budget. Additionally, before, we assumed that every household was only 60% efficient in their irrigation system, and now we're asking our customers to be 70% efficient. So those are the changes that are going to be reflected in your water budget. I think Jim went through this, but there are some changes to how the range there on how you get from one tier to the next. So tier 1 is pretty simple there. Now it's 8. In tier 2, we used to let you go 5% over budget before you went into tier 3. Now we're keeping that right at 100%. But the lower tiers are giving you a wider range before you bump into the higher costs. So what this really means, I think the impact, I've talked about algebra, so I'll talk about the impact now. Water budgets are being tightened by about 25%. And based on the last 3 months of water use, we think 78% of our customers are going to be able to meet them. I'm going to go through some examples of households because I think it will bring it home how this works. But the fixed rate impacts everybody. No matter how much water you use, you're still paying that same fixed rate. If a customer is using less than 8 units a month right now, they'll see a very small change. It'll only be the fixed cost. A customer who's using about 20 units a month and staying within their budget will see about a $6 a month increase. But of course, those who are not meeting their budgets, those who are way over budget and excessive use, they're going to see a very significant change in their bill. And the intent of that, obviously, is that we can try and make them pay attention.
When you keep talking about the HCCF, you're talking about the indoor portion.
That's correct. Yeah. Okay, so let's look at a couple of homes. So this is a single family home. You can see in August, they used 22 units. Is this oh, there we go. Okay, they used 22 units in August. They met their budget before, and they will meet their budget now under the new budget that's been tightened up. So their bill went up about $6.62. You can see in January, they were using 19 units, currently meeting their budget. Under the proposed change, they would just miss their budget. Now, their increase goes up less than it did up here because they're simply using less water. So because they're paying for less units, their increase is smaller. This is a home that's meeting their budget some months. You can see they're going to meet it, or they did meet it previously, 43 units before. 43 units was their budget. Now they're not going to make it anymore. So they'll be over budget and see an increase here of $21. In January, though, they met their budget. They'll continue to meet their budget, and the increase is $4.13. Okay, so here's a home that is wall-to-wall grass, using quite a bit of grass in their landscaping. Previously, they were just under budget. Now they'll be over, increase of $36. Previously in January, they were a little bit over. Now they'll continue to be over in an increase of $29. And again, the reason that increase is less significant in January is just because they're using less water. So this is our habitual tier 5 user. This is a customer whose budget is 87 units and is using 364. So this is the customer whose attention we really want to get. You can see they were way over budget before. They're way over budget now. They have a bill increase of almost $600. Again, in January, they should, their budget is 41 units. They're using 250, and their increase is $422. So I can assure you we've tried to get this person's attention before, but this is the intent of the budget-based tiered rates.
All these things you have is set rate, proposed rate. Is that proposed the following year or proposed in 4 years according to your?
I'm sorry. Yeah, good question. So when I'm saying current, that means the rates you're paying right now, today, the rates you've been paying since 2010. Proposed means the rates that come into play July 1st if passed.
What July 1st?
This July 1st.
So in year 1.
Correct. So I'm sure we'll talk about this, but just to be really clear, the rates that are going to be voted on this year are only this year. The notice covers 5 years, but the rates that will be voted on will only be this year. Okay. So how can we help you? If you look back at some of our customers, I just showed you the one with wall-to-wall turf and the customer in Tier 5. We would like to get those customers within their budget. So we have a great deal of programs available to our customers that can help them get there. We offer a turf rebate of $1 per square foot, up to $2,000 per single family household. We also offer similar programs to HOAs. We have for free smart irrigation controllers, which use a little weather station that's attached to them to determine the ET every day. And because we're basing our rates on ET, it will change your sprinkler timer to match so that you're more easily able to meet that budget. We offer a rebate on irrigation nozzles, taking out old, inefficient irrigation nozzles and replacing them with more efficient devices. We have toilet rebates, indoor kits. We have lots of programs available to commercial users. And then we're doing a great deal of educational workshops right now, including landscape workshops and conservation reviews, where we'll actually come to your home and help you reduce your use if you're not able to meet your budget. So we're here to help you if there's a way, if you're over budget and you'd like to work with us to try and reduce your use to stay within your budget, we have programs available and education available to try and help you do that. So at this time, I'll hand it back over to Jim.
When can we ask questions?
Well, yeah, this is the last one. So if you want to ask now, by all means, yes, ma'am.